There was a season in my life when I wondered why my plans always collapsed just before success. I worked hard. I believed deeply. Yet something unseen kept pulling the ground from under my feet. It was not bad luck. It was not lack of talent. It was not even fear. The real enemy was my own mouth. I had been talking too much about things that were meant to grow in silence. What changed my life forever was learning one simple truth that Napoleon Hill hinted at many times but few truly understand. Power grows quiet before it grows loud. And this story begins with the day I learned the first sacred law of success. Part 1: The power of sacred silence. In a small American town lived a man named Daniel Carter. He was not famous. He was not rich. He worked a simple job and lived a quiet life. But inside his heart burned a vision so strong it kept him awake at night. Daniel dreamed of building something meaningful. Something that would change his life and give his family freedom. He could see it clearly in his mind. The office. The work. The feeling of purpose. It felt real long before it became real. Like many people, Daniel made a common mistake. He talked about his dream. At first it felt good. When he told friends, they nodded politely. Some smiled. Some offered advice. Others laughed softly and said it sounded risky. Daniel did not notice it at first, but each conversation took something from him. After speaking his dream out loud, he felt lighter but also weaker. The fire inside him burned a little less each time. Napoleon Hill wrote that every thought backed by emotion becomes a force. Daniel did not understand this yet. He thought sharing his dream would make it stronger. Instead, he was releasing the energy meant to fuel action. Words became substitutes for progress. He felt productive simply by talking. One evening, Daniel met an older man named Mr. Franklin. He was calm, observant, successful in a quiet way. People respected him, but few knew his story. They sat together on a wooden bench as the sun dipped low. Daniel spoke freely, as he always did. He shared his plans, his hopes, his frustrations. Mr. Franklin listened without interruption. When Daniel finished, he asked one simple question. "Why do you tell so many people what you are building?" Daniel smiled and said, "I want support. I want accountability. I want people to believe in me." Mr. Franklin nodded slowly and said, "Most people do not even believe in themselves. Why would you expect them to protect your vision?" That question stayed with Daniel all night. The next day, Mr. Franklin invited Daniel for coffee. He spoke in a way that reminded Daniel of something he once read by Napoleon Hill. He explained that successful people understand the law of controlled attention and disciplined speech. They know that a goal spoken too early loses its pressure. The mind mistakes talk for achievement. Mr. Franklin said a seed must be buried. If you dig it up every day to show others, it will never grow. Dreams are the same. Daniel began to see the pattern in his life. Every plan he announced failed. Every goal he protected lasted longer. The problem was never his ability. It was exposure. Hill taught that the subconscious mind accepts what it repeatedly hears, especially when spoken with emotion. When Daniel spoke his dream to doubtful people, their words mixed with his own belief. Doubt entered quietly. Confidence leaked slowly. Mr. Franklin shared a story from his own life. Years ago, he had an idea that could change his industry. He told no one except one trusted partner. He worked in silence for years. When the results appeared, people thought it happened overnight. They never saw the long, quiet nights or the discipline of silence. "This is the habit of leaders," Mr. Franklin said. "They let results speak. They do not argue for their vision. They build it." Daniel decided to test this principle. He made a promise to himself. For 1 year, he would not speak about his goal. No social media posts. No explanations. No defending his vision. When asked, he would simply say, "I am working on myself." Something strange happened. His focus sharpened. Without opinions from others, his mind felt clear. The energy that once escaped through words now turned into action. He woke earlier. He worked longer. He felt stronger. Hill described this as definiteness of purpose combined with faith. Daniel was finally practicing it. Silence became his shield. When doubt tried to creep in, there were no outside voices to strengthen it. When obstacles appeared, he did not announce them. He solved them. Each small win built confidence. Confidence built momentum. Daniel also noticed something else. When he stopped sharing his plans, people lost interest. They no longer questioned him or doubted him. He was free. Free from judgment. Free from comparison. Free from the need to explain. This is the first sacred secret of success. Guard your dreams. Not because you fear others, but because you respect the power of your own mind. Napoleon Hill warned that many people fail not because they lack ideas, but because they scatter their power. They talk when they should work. They seek approval instead of progress. Daniel learned that silence is not weakness. It is discipline. It is confidence. It is faith in motion. He began to understand why some people rise quietly while others struggle loudly. The loud ones announce every step. The quiet ones take them. At the end of that year, Daniel had not told anyone what he was building. But something real existed now. Something solid. When he finally revealed it, the response was different. People were amazed. They respected him. They listened. That was the moment Daniel understood. Speak when there is evidence. Stay silent while there is only faith. This is how all great achievements begin. In silence. In belief. In disciplined control of thought and speech. And this is only the beginning. In the next part you will learn the second sacred secret, and why sharing your struggles can be just as dangerous as sharing your dreams. Remember this lesson well. The person who controls their tongue controls their destiny. Engaging hook. There was a moment when Daniel realized that silence was not only protecting his dreams, but also transforming his character. The more he worked quietly, the more life seemed to move in his favor. Doors opened without him knocking. Help arrived without him asking. It felt almost mysterious. One evening he asked Mr. Franklin why this was happening. The old man smiled and said, "You have learned the first law. Now you must learn the second and the third. These are the laws that separate those who look good from those who are truly blessed." What Daniel learned next would change not only how he worked, but how he gave and how he protected his family. Part 2: Giving in Silence and Guarding the Home. Daniel had always believed he was a good person. He helped people when he could. He donated when asked. He sacrificed his time for others. But if he was honest with himself, he also liked people knowing about it. After helping someone, he often told a friend. After giving, he felt a quiet desire to be seen as generous. One afternoon, Mr. Franklin invited Daniel to walk with him through a nearby park. As they walked, Mr. Franklin spoke about a principle Napoleon Hill hinted at many times. He said that every action carries intention, and intention determines the reward. Two people can do the same good deed, but only one receives lasting benefit. Daniel did not understand. Mr. Franklin explained that when a person does good in order to be seen, they are not planting a seed. They are making a trade. They exchange kindness for applause. And applause, he said, is the weakest currency in the world. Napoleon Hill taught that the subconscious mind responds to motive. When your motive is approval, you receive approval. When your motive is service, you receive something far greater. Mr. Franklin told Daniel a story from his past. Years earlier, he quietly paid a stranger's medical bill. He told no one. Months later, an opportunity appeared that changed his entire career. He never connected the two events until much later. That is how silent giving works, he said. You never see the full chain. Daniel reflected on his own life. He remembered times when he helped others and talked about it afterward. He also remembered how nothing seemed to come from those moments except brief praise. He began to understand that he had been draining the power from his generosity. Hill wrote that the universe responds to harmony. When your actions and intentions are aligned, life moves smoothly. When they are not, resistance appears. Daniel saw now that announcing his good deeds created inner conflict. He wanted to help, but he also wanted credit. Mr. Franklin gave him a challenge. For the next 6 months, give without telling anyone. Not a word. Not a hint. Not even a quiet mention. Daniel accepted. At first it was uncomfortable. After helping someone, his instinct was to share. To feel acknowledged. But each time he stayed silent, something shifted inside him. His giving felt lighter. Cleaner. More peaceful. He expected nothing in return, and strangely, more seemed to come to him. Unexpected kindness. New connections. Quiet favor. Mr. Franklin explained that when you give in silence, you train your mind to depend on inner approval rather than outer validation. Napoleon Hill called this self-mastery. It is the foundation of lasting success. Then Mr. Franklin introduced the third sacred rule. Never expose your family problems to the outside world. Daniel felt uneasy. He had shared many frustrations about his home with coworkers and friends. It felt natural to vent. But Mr. Franklin warned him that words spoken in frustration rarely stay where they are spoken. Your home, he said, is your inner circle. When you expose its struggles, you weaken its walls. Hill taught that every environment carries mental influence. When you speak negatively about your family, you invite outside thoughts into a space that should be protected. Those thoughts return to you multiplied. Daniel thought about times he had complained about relatives or private conflicts. He remembered how advice often turned into judgment. How sympathy sometimes became gossip. How peace never truly returned afterward. Mr. Franklin told him something simple and powerful. Most people do not want to heal your family. They want information. That sentence hit hard. When you share family problems, you lose control of the story. People remember what you say. They repeat it. They reshape it. What began as vulnerability becomes rumor. What was said in pain becomes permanent in someone else's mind. Napoleon Hill emphasized the importance of controlled associations. You must choose carefully who has access to your inner life. Your family struggles are not meant for the crowd. Mr. Franklin explained that silence does not mean denial. It means responsibility. Problems should be handled where they belong, within the home or with wise counsel, not with anyone who is willing to listen. Daniel decided to practice this discipline as well. He stopped speaking about family issues outside his home. When frustrated, he wrote privately or reflected quietly. When solutions were needed, he addressed them directly. Something remarkable happened. Tension slowly eased. Respect grew. Without outside voices, misunderstandings resolved faster. Peace returned more often. Hill taught that harmony within the home strengthens the mind. And a strong mind attracts success. By learning to give in silence and protect his household, Daniel felt stronger than ever. He no longer needed applause. He no longer needed sympathy. His energy stayed where it belonged. Mr. Franklin summarized the lesson one evening as they sat quietly. When you stop announcing your goodness, life announces it for you. When you stop exposing your home, peace moves back in. This was the second and third sacred secret. Give without witnesses. Protect your family with silence. Daniel understood now that success was not only about ambition. It was about discipline of speech, purity of motive, and respect for sacred spaces. And there were still more laws to learn. Engaging Hook. Daniel thought he had already learned the hardest lessons. He had learned to guard his dreams. He had learned to give in silence. He had learned to protect his family from outside voices. But one quiet evening, as he sat alone reviewing his progress, Mr. Franklin's words returned to him with new weight. Silence is not just about what you hide. It is about what you protect so it can grow. That night, Daniel realized there were deeper layers to this law. Layers that affected his home, his money, and the moves he had yet to make. What he learned next revealed why many people work hard their entire lives yet never feel secure, prosperous, or ahead. Part 3: Guarding the Home, the Wealth, and the Next Move. Daniel began to notice something important about families that stayed strong over time. They were not perfect. They argued. They struggled. They faced storms like everyone else. But one thing set them apart. Their problems were not public property. Mr. Franklin explained that when you protect your family's privacy, you protect its dignity. When you speak poorly about your spouse or children to outsiders, you place them on trial without allowing them to defend themselves. You create a story where only one side is heard, and that story follows your family long after the moment has passed. Napoleon Hill taught that words shape mental images, and mental images shape behavior. When Daniel complained about his home, even casually, he noticed the atmosphere inside it worsened. His words were not releasing pressure. They were reinforcing tension. Mr. Franklin told him something that changed how he spoke forever. When you label a problem out loud, you give it permission to stay. Daniel reflected on how often people said things like "my spouse never listens" or "my kids are impossible." Those words felt harmless in conversation, but they became commands to the subconscious. Repeated long enough, they became reality. Hill emphasized that the subconscious mind does not reason. It accepts repetition as truth. By speaking dysfunction, Daniel had been feeding it. By choosing silence, he began starving it. This did not mean ignoring issues. It meant handling them wisely. Mr. Franklin explained the difference between counsel and conversation. Counsel seeks solutions. Conversation seeks sympathy. One leads to healing. The other leads to stagnation. Daniel began addressing family matters privately and respectfully. When guidance was needed, he sought it from those with wisdom and discretion. Slowly, harmony returned. Trust grew. Peace became more frequent. Then Mr. Franklin revealed the fourth sacred secret. Never speak openly about your income or wealth. Daniel was surprised. In modern culture, people openly discuss money. Success was displayed. Earnings were shared. But Mr. Franklin warned that wealth exposed too early or too openly becomes a burden instead of a blessing. Napoleon Hill wrote that riches begin in the mind, but they are preserved by discipline. One form of discipline is financial silence. When Daniel told people about his earnings or purchases, he noticed subtle changes. Some became distant. Others became expectant. A few grew resentful. None of it helped him. Mr. Franklin explained that money changes relationships the moment it becomes known. Comparison enters. Expectations form. Envy takes root. Even well-meaning people begin calculating what they think you should give or share. Daniel realized how often generosity became obligation once people knew what he had. Requests increased. Pressure followed. Guilt appeared when he said no. Hill taught that wealth is attracted to respect and repelled by carelessness. Speaking loosely about money treats it as common. Protecting it treats it as valuable. The truly wealthy, Mr. Franklin said, move quietly. They build without broadcasting. They give without advertising. They protect their financial lives the way a general protects strategy. Daniel stopped sharing numbers. He stopped explaining his finances. He allowed people to guess. The peace that followed was immediate. He felt lighter, more in control, more secure. Then came the fifth sacred secret. Never announce your next move. This one struck Daniel deeply. He had always talked about what he was about to do. New ideas, new plans, new directions. He believed it created motivation. Mr. Franklin shook his head gently. Napoleon Hill warned that premature talk dissipates power. The mind receives satisfaction from speaking, even when no action follows. The pressure to perform vanishes once the words are released. A move announced is a move weakened. Mr. Franklin compared life to chess. The strongest player does not explain his strategy. He moves silently. The element of surprise is not aggression. It is wisdom. When Daniel shared his next step, interference followed. Doubt appeared. Competition reacted. Opportunities shifted. Sometimes people actively blocked him. Other times they simply arrived first. The lesson was painful but clear. Timing is power. Silence preserves timing. Hill wrote that success requires the habit of controlled initiative. That means acting decisively without unnecessary explanation. Daniel began keeping his next steps private. He worked quietly. He prepared thoroughly. When action came, it was swift and unexpected. Results improved immediately. People began saying things like, "You came out of nowhere. You moved fast. I did not see that coming." That was the point. Mr. Franklin summarized the lesson simply. Protect your home by speaking life within it and silence outside it. Protect your wealth by treating it as sacred, not social. Protect your next move by keeping it hidden until it is done. Daniel understood now that silence was not secrecy born of fear. It was strategy born of wisdom. Napoleon Hill taught that self-discipline is the price of power. And discipline of speech is one of its highest forms. By guarding his family, his finances, and his future moves, Daniel felt aligned. Focused. Strong. There was only one sacred secret left to learn. And it would tie everything together. But for now, Daniel had learned this truth. What you protect in silence grows in strength. What you expose too early loses power. And those who master silence quietly master life. Engaging Hook. Daniel thought silence had already given him control over his life. His dreams were protected. His giving was pure. His family was peaceful. His money was no longer a burden. His moves were sharp and unexpected. Yet something still felt incomplete. Late one night, while reading an old, worn copy of Think and Grow Rich, he paused on a single idea Napoleon Hill repeated again and again. Every adversity carries the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Daniel realized something then. Many people destroy that seed before it ever has a chance to grow. Not by failure itself, but by how loudly they talk about it. The fourth lesson was waiting for him, and it was about pain, failure, and the quiet strength that transforms both into power. Part 4: Guarding Your Pain and Failures. Daniel had always believed that sharing his struggles made him honest. When things went wrong, he talked. When plans failed, he explained. When life hurt, he vented. It felt human. It felt normal. But Mr. Franklin once told him something that now returned with force. Pain spoken to the wrong ears becomes permanent. Napoleon Hill taught that the mind feeds on repetition. Whatever you dwell on, whatever you speak often, becomes dominant in your thinking. When Daniel talked about his failures, he noticed something troubling. The story of failure became bigger than the failure itself. Mr. Franklin explained that there is a difference between learning from failure and living inside it. One builds wisdom. The other builds identity. When you constantly talk about what went wrong, you stop seeing yourself as someone who failed once. You begin seeing yourself as a failure. And the subconscious accepts that label without argument. Daniel remembered how people loved to listen to stories of struggle. Not because they wanted to help, but because it made them feel better about their own lives. Misery shared became entertainment disguised as empathy. Napoleon Hill warned that sympathy can be more dangerous than criticism. Sympathy keeps a person locked in weakness by validating it. Daniel began to see how often people responded to his struggles with phrases like "that is just how life is," or "at least you tried." Those words felt comforting, but they quietly lowered his standards. Mr. Franklin told him something he would never forget. Do not build a home in your failure. Visit it only long enough to learn. Hill wrote that failure is a temporary condition. Quitting is what makes it permanent. But Daniel realized there was another way failure becomes permanent. Talking about it too much. Every time he repeated the story, he relived the emotion. The disappointment returned. The frustration deepened. The wound stayed open. Silence, on the other hand, allowed healing. Mr. Franklin explained that pain processed privately becomes wisdom. Pain broadcast publicly becomes identity. Daniel decided to test this law as he had tested the others. He stopped telling people about what went wrong. When asked how things were going, he spoke calmly and briefly. He focused on what he was learning, not what he was losing. At first it felt unnatural. He wanted to explain himself. He wanted others to understand. But slowly, something shifted. The emotional weight of his setbacks lessened. Without an audience, the pain had nowhere to perform. Napoleon Hill taught that self-mastery begins with emotional control. Silence was not suppression. It was direction. Daniel began journaling instead of venting. He analyzed his mistakes privately. He asked better questions. What did this teach me? What skill must I develop now? What adjustment is required? Failure became instruction, not humiliation. Mr. Franklin explained that strong people do not advertise their wounds. They treat them as training grounds. There was another danger in sharing pain. People remember your weakest moments long after you have outgrown them. They lock you into a version of yourself that no longer exists. Daniel realized how often others still saw him through the lens of past struggles he had already overcome. Not because he was still weak, but because he had narrated his weakness too clearly. Hill emphasized that the mind cannot rise above the image it holds of itself. When others hold an image of you, they often tried to keep you there. Silence allowed Daniel to redefine himself without resistance. Then Mr. Franklin shared something deeper. Some battles are meant to be fought between you and God alone. When Daniel shared every hardship, he unintentionally invited opinions into moments that required faith. Advice replaced intuition. Noise replaced inner guidance. Napoleon Hill believed that infinite intelligence communicates through quiet reflection. But that communication is drowned out when the mind is filled with voices from the outside. Daniel began taking his deepest struggles inward. He prayed more quietly. He reflected more deeply. He trusted the process more fully. Something remarkable happened. Solutions appeared. Not suddenly, but clearly. Without outside confusion, his judgment sharpened. Hill wrote that clarity is power. Silence creates clarity. Mr. Franklin warned him that not everyone deserves access to your pain. Some people collect stories of struggle like trophies. They use them later, consciously or unconsciously, to define you. By guarding his struggles, Daniel protected his future. He also noticed another benefit. His confidence grew. Without rehearsing his problems aloud, he no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. He felt like a student of experience. Failure lost its sting. This was the fourth sacred secret. Never share your pain and failures with those who cannot help you transform them. That does not mean you never seek help. It means you choose wisely. Counsel should come from mentors, not spectators. From builders, not commentators. Napoleon Hill taught that association shapes destiny. Choose voices that elevate, not echo weakness. Daniel understood now that silence was not hiding. It was focusing. When pain came, he handled it privately. When failure appeared, he studied it quietly. When lessons were learned, he moved forward without announcement. And people noticed the change. They said things like "you seem stronger" or "you do not react the way you used to." They were right. Strength grows fastest in silence. Mr. Franklin summarized the lesson in one sentence. What you protect in silence, God reshapes into strength. Daniel was beginning to see the full picture. Silence was not just a habit. It was a system. There were still 2 sacred secrets left. And each one would require even greater discipline. But Daniel was ready, because now he understood the truth Napoleon Hill hinted at all along. The loud mind reacts. The quiet mind creates. Engaging hook. Daniel believed he had mastered silence. He no longer talked about his dreams, his giving, his family struggles, his money, or his failures. His life felt stronger, steadier, and more focused than ever before. Yet one quiet morning, as he sat across from Mr. Franklin in the early light, the old man said something that unsettled him. Silence alone is not enough. You must also learn what not to reveal about your inner world. Daniel realized then that the next lesson was not about words spoken to others, but thoughts shared too freely from the heart. This lesson would challenge his need for validation at the deepest level. Part 5: Guarding Your Beliefs and Your Inner Confidence. Daniel had always considered himself honest. When he felt uncertain, he admitted it. When he doubted himself, he spoke it aloud. He believed transparency was strength. But Napoleon Hill taught something very different. He taught that faith spoken carelessly can turn into doubt when exposed to the wrong environment. Mr. Franklin explained that beliefs are fragile in their early stages. Like a flame, they need protection before they can withstand the wind. When Daniel expressed his uncertainty to others, he was not releasing pressure. He was feeding doubt. Hill wrote that whatever the mind accepts as true becomes reality through action or inaction. When you repeatedly say "I am not sure I can do this," your subconscious hears a command, not a comment. Daniel realized how often he had weakened himself by speaking uncertainty aloud. Even joking statements like "I do not know if this will work" carried power. Words spoken with emotion shape belief. Mr. Franklin warned him that most people unknowingly act as belief killers. Not because they are cruel, but because they project their own limits. When you share your fears, they confirm them. When you share your doubts, they justify them. Daniel remembered moments when he spoke uncertainty and others responded with caution. Be careful. That sounds risky. Are you sure? Those words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Napoleon Hill emphasized the importance of autosuggestion. What you repeatedly tell yourself becomes instruction to the subconscious. But Daniel now saw that others also contribute to that instruction if he gives them access. The 5th sacred secret was this: never share your doubts, fears, and inner uncertainties with those who cannot strengthen them into faith. Mr. Franklin explained that confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear speak. Daniel began to practice this discipline immediately. When uncertainty arose, he addressed it privately. He wrote his fears down, analyzed them, and replaced them with constructive statements. Instead of saying "I might fail," he said "I am learning what works." Instead of saying "I am not ready," he said "I am preparing." Instead of saying "I am afraid," he said "I am growing." Hill taught that affirmation repeated with emotion becomes belief. Daniel used this law carefully and deliberately. Something remarkable happened. Without speaking doubt aloud, it lost its grip. Fear weakened when it was denied an audience. Mr. Franklin also warned Daniel about another subtle danger: seeking reassurance. When you constantly ask others if you are doing the right thing, you train your mind to depend on approval. Approval becomes the substitute for conviction. Napoleon Hill wrote that definiteness of purpose requires independence of thought. You cannot borrow confidence. You must build it. Daniel noticed how often people sought reassurance not because they needed advice, but because they needed permission. Permission to believe in themselves. He stopped asking questions that placed his power in someone else's hands. Instead of asking, "Do you think this is a good idea?" he asked himself, "Does this align with my purpose?" Silence strengthened his inner voice. Mr. Franklin explained that great leaders are not those who never doubt, but those who do not allow doubt to travel beyond their own mind. They process it, refine it, and transform it into clarity. Daniel began to trust himself more deeply. Without outside noise, his intuition sharpened. Decisions became faster. Confidence felt natural instead of forced. Hill taught that faith is a state of mind that can be cultivated through repetition and control of thought. But faith cannot survive constant exposure to disbelief. Another truth emerged. When you reveal your fears, some people unconsciously use them to control you. Daniel remembered times when others discouraged him by reminding him of doubts he had once shared. "You said you were not sure about this. You said you were afraid of that." Those words were not support. They were anchors. By guarding his inner beliefs, Daniel cut those anchors loose. Mr. Franklin also spoke about emotional discipline. Strong people do not broadcast their emotional storms. They wait until clarity returns. Daniel realized how often emotional honesty had cost him authority. When people saw him uncertain, they treated him as uncertain. Hill emphasized that the world responds to certainty, not explanation. Daniel practiced speaking with calm assurance even when uncertainty existed internally. This was not pretending. It was leadership over his own mind. He learned that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of control. As weeks passed, others noticed the change. Daniel spoke less, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. People listened. Mr. Franklin smiled and said, "You are becoming solid." That word stayed with Daniel. Solid meant rooted, stable, unmoved by every opinion. The fifth sacred secret had transformed him deeply. Protect your inner beliefs. Guard your confidence. Speak faith privately and strength publicly. Napoleon Hill taught that success requires emotional maturity. The ability to govern your inner world determines how the outer world responds to you. Daniel now understood that silence was not emptiness. It was structured. He no longer shared his fears with those who could not help him overcome them. He no longer borrowed certainty from others. He built it within. This discipline created unshakable momentum. And yet, there was still one final lesson remaining. One that would tie every principle together and define how Daniel would move through the rest of his life. The final sacred secret would not be about what he hid from others. It would be about what he committed to himself. And that lesson would complete the transformation. Engaging hook. Daniel stood at the edge of a quiet morning, watching the sun rise the way he had done many times before. But this morning felt different. There was no rush in his chest. No need to explain himself to anyone. No hunger for approval. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. Not finished, but centered. Mr. Franklin's lessons had reshaped him from the inside out. Silence had become his strength. Discipline had become his freedom. Now there was only one final truth left to learn. The truth that separates temporary success from lasting greatness. This was not about hiding anymore. This was about commitment. The kind of commitment that changes destiny. Part 6: The Final Sacred Law and the Quiet Rise. Daniel met Mr. Franklin one last time at the same bench where their journey had begun. The old man looked at him carefully and smiled. "You have learned how to guard your words, your dreams, your giving, your family, your wealth, your failures, your fears, and your plans," he said. "But none of that matters unless you understand this final law." Daniel listened closely. Napoleon Hill wrote that success is the result of habitually doing things others will not do. Most people learn principles. Very few live them consistently. Consistency is the final test. The sixth and final sacred secret was simple, but demanding. Never announce who you are becoming. Prove it with your life. Daniel realized how often people declare change before it happens. They announce new identities, new mindsets, new chapters. But announcement creates illusion. It feels like progress without requiring discipline. Hill warned that the mind is easily deceived by words. When you tell others who you are becoming, your mind feels rewarded too early. The hunger to grow fades. Mr. Franklin explained that transformation is quiet. Growth does not speak. It shows. Daniel thought back to his old habits. How he used to say things like "I am changing" or "I am leveling up." Those words felt powerful, but they demanded nothing afterward. Now he understood. Identity is built through repetition of action, not repetition of speech. The truly disciplined person does not tell people they are disciplined. The truly focused person does not explain their focus. The truly powerful person does not announce their power. They demonstrate it. Napoleon Hill taught that character is what a person does when no one is watching. Daniel saw that silence protected not only his goals, but his integrity. Mr. Franklin told him something that sealed the lesson. The world does not reward intention. It rewards embodiment. Daniel committed himself to living the principles without ever explaining them. No speeches. No announcements. No preaching. Just quiet consistency. Days turned into months. Months into years. Daniel's life began to change in visible ways. His work improved. Opportunities came to him. People trusted him instinctively. He was no longer chasing success. He was attracting it. People asked him how he did it. He smiled and said little. Hill wrote that the strongest influence is example. When you live the truth, people feel it without needing to hear it. Daniel noticed something else. The fewer promises he made out loud, the stronger his commitment became. His word to himself mattered more than any words spoken publicly. This was the final transformation. He was no longer performing growth. He was living it. Mr. Franklin explained that most people fail not because they lack knowledge, but because they lack discipline to live quietly by what they know. Daniel understood now that silence was not secrecy. It was alignment. Every sacred law pointed to the same truth. Energy conserved becomes power. Power applied becomes results. Results speak louder than words ever could. The man who announces nothing confuses his enemies. The man who explains nothing preserves his focus. The man who proves everything earns respect. Napoleon Hill believed that success leaves clues. Daniel realized that silence was one of the greatest clues of all. The loud are often lost. The quiet are often building. Daniel's journey was no longer about becoming visible. It was about becoming solid. One evening, as he walked past the same park where he once doubted himself, he realized how far he had come. Not because others told him, but because his life felt ordered, peaceful, strong. This was the reward of discipline. This was the harvest of silence. Mr. Franklin's final words echoed in his mind. Let your life be so strong that explanation becomes unnecessary. Daniel knew now that destiny is not decided by what you say you will do. It is decided by what you quietly do every day. This was the final sacred law. Do not announce your transformation. Live it. Let your habits introduce you. Let your consistency define you. Let your results speak for you. And when the world finally notices, you will not need to explain anything. Because success explained is fragile. Success demonstrated is permanent. If this story inspired you, strengthened you, or changed the way you see silence and success, subscribe for more powerful motivational stories rooted in timeless wisdom. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and comment below with one lesson you are going to apply starting now.